Hi guys, just want to do a sort of quick best budget build guide for both Ultimate Lepic and Standard Lepic, and I'm going to give you sort of two builds for each Ultimate Lepic and Standard Lepic. So one of each will be just for your sort of general content, your farming, that sort of thing, and then one will also be for bossing. And so for both Ultimate Lepic and Standard Lepic, it's going to require no catalysts and no activators. I've sort of tried to keep it as cheap as possible. So just to quickly show you, Ultimate Lepic comes with these 4 catalysts as standard. It doesn't come with this sort of C here. I've added that sort of separately, so ignore that. I won't be using that for this build. So the idea around the farming build is it's going to be sort of spamming his first ability, because it has a really good base damage. You can get the cooldown really low, so it's actually fantastic for farming, and then sort of you'll be backing that up with your second ability, sort of bringing and clumping all the enemies together into one place. So just to quickly let you know, if you've sort of seen any of the other Lepic builds on YouTube, they almost all use this Firearm Master Transcendent mods, especially when it comes to sort of boss killing. And the simple reason why I'm not going to be using this for either of the builds is it really relies heavily on crit and a lot more investment. With a budget build, you're just not really going to be able to get what you need out of this mod, and so I'm going to be using, for the farming build, no Transcendent mod, and then for the bossing build I will be using Transcendent mod, but I'll sort of explain that when I get to it. So going into the mods, the first one, mid-air maneuvering. Really, you can use whatever sub-module you like. I just like mid-air maneuvering. If you want a cheaper option, then go for one of the blue sub-modules. Just make sure it's sort of max upgraded to level 10 so that you're getting your sort of 10 extra mod slots. So next is MP Collector. This is purely just to keep your MP up because you're going to be spamming your abilities. Now I did try out regenerative braking, but for the sake of a budget build I wasn't really too much of a fan of it. So if you're not aware, regenerative braking, when you use one of your skills you have a chance to recover MP. So you have a 17% chance of recovering MP, and it's on a 10-second cooldown, and you will recover 12% of your max HP. Now, the reason why I went with MP Collector instead is because there is no cooldown. You recover pretty much the same amount of max MP, it's only 0.2% more, and at the same chance. The only difference is MP Collector is when you defeat an enemy, whereas regenerative braking is when you just use an ability. But because this build is around sort of farming, you're going to be killing plenty of enemies with your first ability, and so you're going to be proccing MP Collector more than you'd be able to proc regenerative braking because of the cooldown. And then on top of that, regenerative braking, if you want to sort of max it out, it's about 5 million gold. And I'm already going to be showing you a Transcendent mod for the bossing build. I didn't really want to use 2 different Transcendent mods when talking about a budget build. So if you do want to invest in regenerative braking instead of MP Collector, then absolutely go for it. You can't really go wrong. I just felt that MP Collector was a slightly better pick, especially when it comes to a budget build. So since this build is relying heavily on spamming your first ability, you're going to want a lot of cooldown. So Nimble Fingers and MP conversion, those 2 mods together are just an insane amount of cooldown. So next is Focus on Fire, and there's a few reasons for that. One is Ultimate Lepic comes with this catalyst slot pre-installed, so make the most of it by doing this. It's instead of 16, it costs 8. Also, you want to be doing flat skill power instead of skill power modifier, and that's what Focus Fire has. And the reason being, just to give you the sort of short version, is the general rule of thumb is if a skill has 100% or below skill power, you'd look at using modifier because you're going to get more bang for your buck that way. But above that, you want to start looking at flat skill power because again, you'll get more bang for your buck that way. And as you can see, Lepic's first ability has quite a high base skill power of 585%. And on top of that, Focus on Fire also gives you a little bit more cooldown. So the next mod is HP Amplification, and if you like, you can just use Increased HP instead. Doesn't really make too much of a difference, so I just like to use HP Amplification instead of Increased HP because it gives you a tiny bit more HP, and that's just purely for survivability. And lastly is Maximised Range. It just fits in nicely with a few mod slots that you have left, and more range on your first ability is going to mean that you're hitting more enemies and killing more enemies really. And the reason why I've used Maximised Range instead of Skill Expansion is it simply gives you double the amount of range at level 1. So Skill Expansion gives you 12%, Maximised Range gives you 24%, and really the Skill Power modifier is only -5%. And again, when it comes to Lepic's abilities, Power modifier has little effect, so you don't need to worry about that. So going over to the bossing build, the main mod here is Power Unit Change, and so what this does is your second ability, Overclock, instead of increasing your skill power, it will now increase your firearm attack, so it gives you a 52% firearm attack for 5 seconds, which is a really good amount of firearm attack to get. And so as you can see here, the base cooldown is 20 seconds with only a 5-second duration, and so what you really want to do is bring those numbers closer together. And so what you'll want is MP conversion and Nimble Fingers because of the insane amount of skill cooldown that you're going to get from that. And so that brings the cooldown down to 7.6 seconds and duration up to 5. So you're almost able to keep this ability up at all times. And I will sort of explain in a moment, but your reactor, you can actually make it so that you can have this up at all times. And then going on to the sub module, as with the farming build, just pick whatever you like. And then the last 2 mods are purely for survivability. So you've got your HP Amplification and Increased HP just for a massive amount of HP. So the idea really when it comes to the bossing builds is you just don't even use any of your abilities other than your second ability, and what you do, you'll just, every time this is off cooldown, use it, and then that way you'll have that increased firearm attack for pretty much the whole fight. So I'll put some footage on in the background, but I have actually tested this build solo against both Devourer and Executioner, and I actually use standard Lepic rather than ultimate Lepic, and I also use my Thunder Cage, which I have a very low investment in, and I will sort of show that in a moment, to show that you really don't need heavy investment. Even with this budget build with no catalysts, no activators, you can solo some of the bosses. Of course, when it comes to sort of the harder bosses like Frostwalker, you're not going to be wanting to use these sort of budget builds. You're going to be probably a bit of a liability to your team, but by the time you get to that point, you are probably going to have more catalysts, more activators ready to invest, and you've probably decided who you want to invest in. So again, just to show you the gun that I use, it's this Thunder Cage here. It's not even maxed out in terms of the unique ability, and I only have 2 catalysts and of course the 1 activator on it. So I won't go through the build in detail, but just to quickly show you, it's just a generic crit firearm attack build, so nothing special. And even with that, I was able to kill Devourer in around 2 to 3 minutes, and Execution in a little under 5 minutes. You know, not going to break any records with that, but considering it's a budget build, super low investment, I feel like you can't really go too wrong with that. And of course you can use whatever weapons that you've already got built up. You've probably got weapons that are way more built up than my Thunder Cage and that are better for bossing, so you're going to be able to kill those bosses even quicker than those. I just wanted to give you a sort of almost worst case scenario to show that it can be done. So in terms of what guns I would suggest using with this, I don't really like to give you a set gun to use when it comes to budget builds, because it sort of defeats the purpose of it being a budget build, but you can never go wrong with a Thunder Cage, and you probably have got that built up by now since it's pretty much the starter gun you get given. And with it being the best mobbing weapon, you can't really go wrong with that for your farming build, although you won't really need the gun because you're going to be spamming your abilities mostly to do the farming. But yeah, in terms of the bossing, I'll just say use whatever gun that you got built up so your strongest weapon. So in terms of the reactor, you're going to want a burning mechanics reactor, and so that is a fire and tech reactor, and just get a reactor that links in with whatever weapon you're going to choose to use with this build. In terms of the secondary stats, the main stat that you want is cooldown, and if you can get skill duration up with that, that's going to be perfect for the bossing build, because if you remember I mentioned that with the reactor you can actually get your second ability to stay up at all times, and you do that by getting cooldown and duration, and so that'll mean that you can keep your firearm attack at all times throughout the boss fight. Other options that you can get is sort of tech skill boost, fire skill boost, cost, range. It doesn't really matter too much, just try and aim for cooldown at the very least if you can. So for external components, similar to guns, I don't really like to give you a best in slot, because again, if you're going out and sort of spending hours and hours and hours just farming best in slot external components, kind of defeats the point of a budget build. And so my suggestion would be just to go for a generic sort of tanky set that you've probably already got, so you know, your sort of HP, your defense, your resistances. The only thing I'd say is if you can get your secondary stats with some sort of MP recovery, it does lean in quite nicely to the build. Not necessary, but can be nice to just keep your MP topped up. So going into standard Lepic, it basically is the same build. Normally try and make the most of the different pre-install catalysts between the ultimate and standard variants of the characters, but in this case this was just the best build regardless, and so it's the exact same build as your ultimate Lepic, so I won't bore you with going through the details. Just sort of what I've already said for the ultimate Lepic version sort of stands here as well. And it's same when it comes to the standard Lepic bossing build, it's the same as the ultimate version, so everything I've already said for the ultimate version stands here as well. I won't sort of bore you with going through it all. So yeah, I hope that helps. Thanks.